3 weeks? Is it? I definitely err on the shorter. Like, get it out there. If they've got good answers, they'll be able to get it back to you quickly. Because if you're prepared, you want to put the pressure on your competition. Use speed as your advantage. Finally, in terms of pricing structure and pricing, early in the relationship, and certainly well before an RFP comes out, you want to be having those discussions with your contacts. And they're probably not going to say, well, we think the pricing should be X. But they might say, well, we think more like whether it's per megawatt or per endpoint or peak load or whatever the metric is. They're probably going to be prepared to give you some of the thinking and discussion that's gone on around structure. And they might give you some hints around what's reasonable and what's unreasonable. But the minute that you get close to the RFP itself, and certainly once it's issued, even touching pricing is absolutely verboten. And so you're not going to get any guidance. So early in that process, you want to start feeling out your customer targets, even if you're in a trial or whatnot, but you want to start getting those data points early because you're not going to get them later. That's sort of RFPs. A couple of other topic areas. I'll pass it along. Intellectual property. This is probably more specific to software than anything, but if you're a small company, use caution regarding customization and the ownership of IP. In my experience, it's often easier to include it in the next release than to try to get some chunk of money for customization, even though that might sound attractive, because especially if you're not negotiating a $20 million contract, but it's $1 million contract or something, you're most likely using their starting point in terms of contracts. And the IP ownership language in those contracts is incredibly strong. And the minute that they're paying you to do something, the procurement guy's first reaction is always, well, then I own it. And if you're a software company, that's generally not the way you're building your product. And so you just want to think about that. It's easy to get sort of backed into a corner on that. And then sort of my final point, and just sort of these few thoughts of kind of food for thought, is diversity programs. For a small company, this is probably not something that you're thinking about necessarily. And I will caveat, this is mostly based on my experience with California utilities, so I don't know how it changes state to state. But I will say that there certainly are, the IOUs especially, have very active diversity programs that extend into their suppliers and their subcontractors. Which means at a minimum, you need to be prepared to answer diversity questions about your ownership, your staff makeup, and your subcontractor staff makeup. And avoid conversations where just accidentally I was in a room with a big California utility presenting, and the diversity folks came in and said, wow, this looks really white and male around this table, kind of thing, which makes for a very awkward conversation. Even though we weren't as a company, it was a really sort of funny discussion. In my experience, this came up during the RFP process, not during trials. If you have a significant portion of your service that's provided by a subcontractor, project management or deployment or something like that, I would seriously consider having multiple subcontractors, or having a subcontractor or multiple subcontractors, but at least one that is minority owned or women-owned or something like that in some way, shape, or form. Because if it can be an advantage in this evaluation process. If you're clear on your numbers and you can help a utility meet their targets, it can be sort of a positive. So not a comprehensive, and I didn't. I skipped sort of the how to support utilities. I think Ethan did a nice job on that. But sort of just a few kind of sort of startup company sort of food for thought. So I'm happy to ask questions.